Hello, yogis. Good morning or greetings to you in whatever time you're finding this video. My name is Alyssa. If we haven't met in person, welcome. The intent of this offering is to be accessible, which means it's to be of use to you. So feel free to use it as you'd like. You might find that means that you don't do all the postures or that you do different poses. Perhaps you just use this as the underplay for a time holder for a meditation practice, etc., so on. All that is welcome. I want to let you know that I've been, since the beginning of the month, taking donations. All donation proceeds for these videos have been going to the Minnesota Healing Justice Network, and I'm going to continue a little longer through the 3rd. That's Friday, I think, of July to take donations for them. You can always just note it if you're sending it to me or send it on to them if you didn't get a chance. A few folks said they needed like a minute to sort that out. So just know that it's okay. There's not like a rough timeline on this. And you could always give to these organizations privately, directly on your own, and that would be just fine. But starting on July 4th, I will begin to take donations for the month of July for the Black Trans Task Force. This is a Washington-related group affiliated with the Lavender Rights Project. And I've noticed a lot of my Seattle compatriots and collaborators have been taking donations or funneling donations in that direction. And I think just that the pertinence of centering Black trans voices in the movement right now is really important. It's important to me. I want to hear those voices. And so I suggest that maybe the first thing that you could do is just go to their website, which is listed with the video, and look at what their advocacy is, look at what they're doing, look at who's involved. Some of my favorite activists and even performance artists are involved in this group. So it's really cool. Go check it out. And I'm giving 50% of proceeds. I always want to be really transparent about money, etc., because I think that what we're doing here doesn't really gel with money in a real way. So we're always trying to sort of make two things fit together that don't quite fit together in all ways. So know that 50% of donation proceeds are going to me. I'm functionally unemployed. So I've started to find a way to think about how I can continue advocacy work and also feed my family, I guess. So thank you. If you have feedback, or if you need to say anything to me about that, or if you're angry, or if you're happy, or if you want to tell me there's a better way to talk about it, I'm open, I'm learning. So feel free to reach out. Let me know. I'm here for you. Otherwise, this is a Yin Yoga practice. So let's get to the thing we're doing. We're going to stay in postures for time. Here, we're coming up on the full moon. The full moon in July is kind of a spectacular experience. The middle of summer is always a really powerful moment of blossoming and ripening. I live on a farm in the San Juan, so I'm spending a lot of time working with plants and working with things as they ripen, and it's kind of interesting watching how things sort of speed up to be there for the full moon, to be ready, to be part of that party, right? So one of the things that full moon offers us often is an access to our own tenderness. Things tend to sort of spring out and brighten up and be exposed, etc. So it's almost a more yang or more sort of solar side of our yin practice. And so we'll do a little bit of supported back bending and front body opening. I really suggest, if you have blocks in your house, I have these ones my dogs have chewed, but you could also utilize a towel or a set of towels, just your basic, like the kind you use to take a shower with. I like to fold them at different settings. You can roll them. It gives you a lot of height differential, and maybe 2 or 3 would be good if particularly you know that you like to have a lot of support and feel cozy. Use pillows, use straps, etc. Use t-shirts and towels nearby as you need to. And remember to let it be adaptable. Since I'm not with you in time and space, unfortunately, I can't know about the feedback you have directly and how you're feeling in the posture, but you do. You know how you feel, so you can adjust it. Remember that is the point of view, right? That there's no right pose you're trying to leverage yourself into, but instead the postures are here as a practice for you. I like to begin by uniting with 3 rounds of the seed sound of Om. I offer Om as a secular chant, the idea that we're resonating the universe by making the noise and thus acknowledging our efficacy in that network, both our smallness and humbleness and our broadness as being interconnected as such. So if for any reason Oming or chanting isn't for you, or it means something else for you that doesn't jive, feel free to sit with us in presence instead. Let your eyes close or gaze down at a spot on the earth or the wall in front of you. And let your hands fall into relative neutral. Let your head set in relative softness over your shoulders and sit upright through your spine. To clear and prepare the energetic channel of your body, take a big deep inhale in through your nose. And open mouth, exhale, HA. Inhale, prepare for Om. Take a long inhale in through your nose and a slow exhale out. And let's begin today in supported child's pose, Balasana. So you might be familiar with child's pose. You can head to a version you like. Remember, we're going to stay a little longer than you might in a more active form of practice. So I like to support. You might support underneath your knees. If they feel tender or bony, your knees can be together or wide as your mat. Some folks like that, more of a hip stretch for some. And also set a bolster or a pillow up underneath you or in between your torso and your legs to catch you as you come forward and down. A lot of folks will like to have a block or a stack of books or maybe folded towel underneath the forehead so that you have support, or maybe under the chest. Your arms can be out long in front or back by your hips with your palms facing up. You're always welcome to stack your hands or fists for a lighter lift. Once you're in the shape, it should be a place you can be relatively relaxed without needing to futz too much or move around. I'll come in and out, often demonstrating entrances and then coming out to be able to speak with you, because there's so much relaxation and closeness to the ground, and make sure that you can hear me when it's pertinent. Once you're inside your version of Balasana, I think the first thing I want to say to you is if it's not for you, you think it's not going to be kind to stay in for at least a few minutes, then you can choose a different shape. Right away, you might decide to be on your back or your belly. You might decide to adjust the version of the posture that you're doing so that more weight is forward as opposed to back. Know that when we work the front seam, we do often end up bending the knees and putting pressure in the lower back. And these are spaces that need strengthening for a lot of us, often prone to injury. I want to be mindful about the degree of sort of pressure that you're placing on your body. If you have knee injuries, I'm with you. I've been there. It's really difficult to sort of feel and figure out like where you need to work. And it might mean you don't do poses like this at all, and that's okay. You might be at a place where you do it. It's just like a lot of support. You'll be in maybe tabletop instead of child's pose, working the knee bend there. And so consider what you're doing in this posture. The back of the body extends softly, the pelvis and the hips fold, the knee folds. And so the front of the body extends even though you're compressing. So it doesn't have to be to the nth degree, right? Just some version of that, some portion of that. Some feeling is usually enough for you to know that you're doing it. And some could be about 10%, can be very subtle in a yin practice. So as you're here in this first posture, now having said that, just giving you enough information to figure out how to be where you are long enough to listen. We'll talk about the tenets of the yin practice. You may be very familiar. For a while, I stopped repeating them because so many of my students, I felt like knew them and could teach them back to me. But then I was told that it was comforting to hear them. So I'll say them again. It's nice to hear the guidelines, just to know that we're supported, right? Test the netting on your rig, as it were. So in yin, we work with this polarity of yin and yang, which I mentioned, which comes from China to a degree. We often talk about it in a Buddhist context, and I think mostly that's because a lot of my yin teachers have been Buddhist practitioners, but it's not necessarily a Buddhist point of view. The two ideologies often, I think, were practiced together or perhaps are being learned by people in the same context, and so they come up. But this idea of yin and yang is about polarity. Yang is sort of the dominant culture that is, in my opinion, hopefully being changed and torn down right now. But this idea of what is always busy and productive and moving, we need that energy. I'm not saying we can do away with it. There's always some yang present, even in a yin space or practice or context. But this sort of solar energy of productivity, of commodity, of energetic movement, It's very visible. It's very obvious, right? And we tend to be familiar with it. Yin, sometimes we haven't learned about it all. It's that quiet, subtle, internal, gentle, soft place where we're receiving, where we're being without necessarily taking action. You could think of it, maybe if you're an Ashtangi, as the structure part of the business as opposed to the sweetness or the movement, the sukha, the ease part of the business. And so, as we work with this sort of body context, we use three tattvas. We use postures inside of physical context as a means to pay attention to how things are. So there's a meditative quality regardless of what's going down with how the pose shows up in the body. So don't worry if you're thinking, am I doing it right? That may be a yang context. Take on the yin attitude. Our three tattvas or guidelines keep it simple. The first is the edge. So you may be experiencing the edge. And the edge is not the trepidatious edge at the cliff of the canyon, right? This is more where you feel the edge of your sweater stretch back when you're folding it to put it away on the shelf. You should be able to stay where it is in that shape and softness, even though there is some tensile pressure, some compressed pressure on the fibers. And you might think of the fibers really as a way to think of your body's connective tissue, which is the targeted tissue of this sort of practice. Your joints, your bones, your fascia and myofascia, even to a degree, the structures of your blood and your organs. It's continuous. It runs through your system. It connects you, right? So you're working on the structure that is the stuff of you and how it regenerates with these pressures. The edge is really about 40 to 70% of what you might do in a more yang practice where you're working with muscle tissue and movement. We want to find this edge softly. If you get in, you think, whoa, this is too much, it's always okay to adjust, right? Always want to find a place we don't have to turn on muscle. We don't have to be active. We don't have to sort of convince or fight to stay. So you can always use props to prop yourself up. Some poses will, even to a degree, require it. If you don't have props, know that you can attempt soft yang versions, soft active versions, and practice how yin it can be, right? That's a valid way of working, especially in kindness with relative obstacles of our time. And their second tattva is that, in fact, is stillness. So we want to be able to be still where we are. So if you have to move, it's okay to move. You're never stuck or trapped. But if your nose itches 100 times, start to think about whether or not you really need to scratch it, or is that a distraction, idiosyncrasy. I'm fidgety, so notice this for a few breaths before you decide whether or not action is required. But it's okay to come out of the pose at any time. You can always come to your back or come back to a seat and process, release anything that starts to feel extreme or intense. Sometimes you move because you gotta move props out of the way because you're more relaxed, you need more space. Sometimes it's the opposite. But just consider stillness as an idea. Your third tattva is time. Remain in the sense of time. This week I've really been thinking about time and how we process time, how we think about past versions of the self, how we think about future versions of the self, both the self we think of as what witnesses, both the self we think of as our ego, the self we think of as our culture, and really how continuous those things are. Right? Brain chemistry really tells us that we're barely separate organisms from a brain interactive cognitive point of view with those in our community. So consider how much your community's welfare, your community's care, your community's freedom is important to your freedom and vice versa. So as you do this work, I'll always let you know about halfway points, final minute points. You're a little bit past halfway in this first hold, in this first posture. And of course, since we're thinking about time and sustainability a little bit, I'm going to offer long holds, which may mean you really want to come into a sort of shallow depth of the pose at the beginning and let yourself ease in, or be really kind with the desire to shift or come out of the pose and maybe come back. Really support yourself in the kindness that is required to be with things over time, especially things that may be difficult to process. I'll put out there that discomfort is sometimes part of this practice, but it isn't required. It's not like you earn better results because you were uncomfortable. But I do think that it's important to practice being uncomfortable. And if your yoga practice isn't uncomfortable ever, you're really missing an opportunity to create resiliency for yourself and those around you. So notice, right, when the time is. The good news is yoga is self-adjudicated. So if today is not the day to be uncomfortable in your practice, you have the power to decide. I think it's the same context that injury teaches us as we heal. Like, when is it time to omit that work, to let it rest for another day? When is it time to creep back in and to be willing to sort of work differently as we create sustainability? You're in your last 2 minutes in this hold, in this posture today. Notice how things are and continue to be quite kind. I'll put forth that besides discomfort, there's also just this idea of kindness. Kindness is one of the most difficult things to really practice on a deep level, because I think we're good at practicing it up to the point that we're comfortable practicing it. And then we feel like we have to use tension, or in yoga, we often use the word violence, even a small amount of it, to get ourselves to performance so we can win. I really like Yin because it's process oriented, not product oriented. While you might come because you want to heal your left hip, or you want to work through tension in your right shoulder, you're tight, or you feel like you're hypermobile and you need to create connective tissue structure, and that's why you're here. If you have goals, it's okay, right, to have that idea of goal. But remember that the process is happening now, right? The benefit of your practice is happening now. So pay attention to what is right now. Listen to the sensations of your body. You can come back to your breath. And for this final minute in this first pose, consider resiliency. Sometimes resiliency practice is saying, I'm cool where I am. I can stay and be here for another minute and pay attention, be alive and awake here. Sometimes resiliency is, I can't be alive and awake because now I'm fighting with what is. So I need to change it for this last minute. I need to allow myself early release or a different point of view. And very slowly, over the next 5 to 10 breaths, really in Yin, our transitions are Yin 2, very slow, liquid, fluid, soft. Take your time to exit your posture. You might come up and forward. Often we do to release to hands and knees position. You might shift from side to side a couple of times or back and forth. It's okay to take your time to organize props. I noticed for myself, I was kind of raised in yoga community without any props, and I start to use them in Yin. Sometimes it feels like I have to be incredibly graceful being able to move the prop, but your block's going to fall over and your cat's going to be in the way, and it's okay. See if you can let your humanity be a part of your practice. Let the reality be part of the thing, as opposed to always seeking some sort of perfection or grail of the idea. All right, we're going to come next onto the front seam of the body for some Spinks Pose work. So I'm just going to take a couple of these props and move them out of shot. But I am going to take my towel and fold it up underneath my bottom ribs. You can do this with a block if you're not sensitive to its hardness level. You could also do it with a pillow, higher height if you like. And that just gives me a little lift without having to engage. As you come onto the front seam, legs are out long, elbows relatively underneath the shoulders. Some of us will lower down by coming more forward or widening the arms out. And especially if you have a great deal of pressure in your lower back, give yourself permission to do that. If you're upright, you can do anything you like with your head. Hang it. You can place a block underneath your forehead or under your chin. Sometimes that takes time to adjust, so take your time. Every once in a while, someone has a lot of room in their lower back and wants to bend their knees. That's okay as long as it's not super active. Let it be soft. It also come up onto your hands for the seal form of the posture. Generally, I offer an entrance into that also at a later time in our timeline of the pose. Hang your head if you wish. Find an upright neck if you prefer. Some people really prefer that space. Just depends on how your neck is, how it's shaped. And you probably know more about that from feeling than I do from being in a different time and space than you are. So listen to those effects. And then we'll stay for time. So seek ease and relaxation, softness. For poses like this where the lower back is in a position of extension, we don't usually think of it that way, but when we extend, always the front body is what we're thinking of. your hamstrings and your glutes, your butt and your back thighs may start to engage and turn on and feel tight or over reactive. And if that's true, you can always move them softly, etc. Remind them to release or lessen some of the pressure by lowering your upper body more down. For some folks, even the lower back curve is going to be too much no matter what. For those folks, you might even roll up your blanket underneath the front of your hips and let there be a tuck of your tail downward a little bit so that there's rounding almost in your lower back. And you'd bring your upper body all the way down, almost lower than your hips with your head for that variation. I'm going to allow some intentional silence in this practice. You can be with time. You might notice your breath or the sounds and sensations around you without getting too attached to them. Know that occasionally sounds may come from my microphone. Occasionally you can hear a rooster crow, my dog rustle by, etc. So that's just a forewarning so you can manage reaction, let yourself be with what is without needing perfect silence or perfect conditions for peace. I have a feeling that if we wait for the perfect conditions for peace, we're just never going to get it. And this is your halfway mark in your hold in Sphinx. Continue to seek relaxation where you can. Create support where you need it. Practice paying attention. And as we approach these last 2 minutes in our time in Sphinx Pose, you might decide that it needs to change. Maybe there's been enough pressure and you need to lower down early, take a different setting. Maybe there's space and softness now and you need a little more pressure and bending the knees is appropriate or coming up onto the hands. Know that if you enter one of these sort of quote unquote deeper variations, they're really different poses. Sometimes they just put different pressure in different areas. It might not be for you. You can always decide to lower back down. One of my teachers really emphasizes walking your hands back under your shoulders so you don't have to use arm strength to hold yourself up, or coming up with blocks underneath the forearms or a lift there so that it's not so high is another option. Wherever you end up, breathe and pay attention. Remember, you can change directions. You can change your mind. Right? Sometimes we get so stuck in the idea that we weren't as we should have been in the past, or we weren't as we would have wished to have been with new information or perspective now, instead of acting now with that new perspective and information. We continue to come towards what's going on now? How is it now? And you're entering your final minute in this hold. And I always want to put out there that flexibility is mostly genetic and mostly how our joints are shaped. I've been told by many that my joints are shaped particularly to be quite mobile, which has its advantages. Some of you probably have bodies like that too. And it also has its disadvantages, just like tightness and structure does. Remember, the practice is about balancing things, not about coming towards any one goal. It might seem like putting your feet on your head is going to make your life better. I can tell you from experience that it doesn't really do much, right? Unless, of course, somehow doing that is intentional ritual to build your idea of self. Then perhaps it has value. Really, only in the practice of it is the value, right? Not the achievement. And slowly over the next 5 or 6 rounds of breath, take your time to let go of the pose you're in. Often the release offered is to come all the way down onto the front seams. So if you have props under there, you might slide them out and off. And as you come down, you might find that you need to bring one ear to the mat or the other. Sometimes wagging the sacrum from side to side helps, or bending the knees and dropping the heels. Some people will find stillness to be enough. We're going to do a little counterbalance in the crawling or sleeping infants. So bend your right knee and slide it out to the right so that you have almost like a half frog leg here. Your foot can be close into your body or far out. You can pad underneath the knee. In fact, I tend to do that. If it's a lot in the inside edge of your right leg, you could also pad underneath your opposite left hip so that you're a little bit taller and there's a little bit less range of motion asked of you. You can come down onto the hands or the forearms. You're welcome to stay upright. Some people do prefer that sort of pressure in the lower back. For some of us, it's like asking for a cramp. So feel free to come down, either ear on the mat. Sometimes turning the head away from the bent knee gives us a little neck stretch, but just be mindful with your neck. Different pressures in the neck just create issue. And we'll stay for time. Not as much time on this posture as the last two. A little bit of a counter pose. You're about halfway through your time on this side in this posture. I find teaching this class to be very interesting because of the stopwatch. I know some teachers teach all types of group movement classes with different types of stopwatches and timers and things. I used to teach an active form of hot yoga where we timed everything, but eventually you just did it all by feeling because you'd practiced it so many times that you knew when it was over, etc. And I think that when we think of time, we're really thinking about a measurement of beats. We're not necessarily thinking about a cycle of samsara of our lifetime or a cycle of nature, of Prakriti. We're not thinking about how things spin around and around. We're usually thinking about the time of that dominant culture of deadline. Of we have to get there and do this, so there's only enough time. And that way we often think about our lives as something that we have to accomplish before we die, And what is the value inside of that work? It's like a quantity-based thing. You got to do a lot before it's over. And I think that that's, not an unvaluable way to think. There's some context there. That this idea of time as something that your mind creates can be interesting to study. It's been adaptationally, functionally useful for us as a species to be able to take events and tie them together with cause and effect. It's often why storytelling is such a great way for us to learn, because it's how our mind lines up ideas to a certain function. Tries to figure out how to connect those, associate those ideas of, the bug that looks like that stung me and I got sick. Or, when that member of my group died in the forest gathering berries, their skin looked like this and they were near this berry and maybe that berry did it to them, etc. Like a lot of pragmatic reasons why trying to avoid death would lead us to cause and effect, to try and consider events from the past so we can avoid danger in the future, or so that we can thrive and find advantage in the future again. But it is a system that leaves out a great deal of information and often is inaccurate as we study it more, both from science and from experience. Consider how you relate with time, how you relate with your sense of self over time. And consider that as you begin to release this side of the posture. You can slide your right leg back, roll it around a little bit. You might need 5 or 10 breaths just to be in stillness or be in transition, to notice how things are. And when you're ready, you'll just begin to switch sides. You can turn your gaze the opposite way and slide your left knee out and up to the left. There might be a kind, organized, slow reorganization of your towel or your props, etc. If you turned your head one way, you might do that again on this side. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. Often our body's needs are asymmetrical, so allow yourself to meet that. Maybe you feel like one side is really tight and the other side is always pretty open. You might then, at the halfway mark here, switch back to the side that's more tight, or give extra time by pausing the video on the side that makes sense for you to stay in longer. And of course, then we create narrative and story about ourselves and our experiences as a way to process time. I know some of you are probably string theory nerds and have thought about this before. But the context that everything that we think of as happening over a timeline is really happening continuously all of the time. It's really a trip, I think. But we consider process then as valuable because the process and the product become the same thing. They're happening at the same time. The seed is happening at the same time as the blossom is happening, at the same time as the fruit, at the same time as the decay, right? So give yourself a little bit of credit for being a being of cycles inside of a continuum. And notice the narratives that we gain. Some of them have great value and we want to choose them and keep them. And some of them we might grow out of, we might not need anymore as we process experience. Sometimes we need to create new ones. The Yin practice asks us to slow down enough to observe. Halfway through your time in this pose on this side, and you're here in your final minute on this side. A great softness over the course of time, maybe many breaths. Begin to release your posture. You can slide your left leg back and cultivate movement once more. Remove any props out of the way or off to the side. And very gently, we'll come up to a tabletop position. Really do take your time to get there. It's just a little organizational note so that you can really let your timeline emerge slowly. You might come up and rock from side to side, stretch your wrists. There might be a little bit of cat and cowing, a little bit of movement if you like. We're going to do a little sasangasana, a little supported rabbit. Now, we're not going to do it for very long. This is a little counter for your neck before we do some other neck-related activities. We're rounding the upper back, and I just want to say that sometimes it's important to keep the round in your upper back and limit the range of motion so that it's not strenuous on your neck or your lower back. So it might not be super deep even to be effective. For this posture, instead of extending the spine, we're trying to round the back. And so if you've done it in the active form, you'll find they're holding your feet and you're tucking your chin and you're kind of pulling. To sort of alleviate that sense of pulling, what we're going to do instead is try to round the body towards the knees, around the forehead, towards the legs. So you're going to put your hands on the ground beside you and bend your elbows and round. Now for me, stacking my forehead on my fists is really helpful, or folding up a prop to a height that's going to help me have space. I'm letting my tail drop under and I'm letting myself kind of hunch down. If it doesn't feel supported enough, you can also take your prop, especially soft ones, and kind of put them underneath your sternum, your breastbone, between your rib cage. You might even sort of push them back a little so your stomach has pressure, but not so much that you feel overpressured. You can drop your belly back down, and then you might just hang your head. And we're only going to be here for about 2-3 minutes, much less time than our other postures. And your hands might be accessible to you, so in that case, you might take them back and flip the palms up. Sometimes this feels like a lot of hanging in the neck, so if that's you, take the supported form instead. Some people will be able to put their forehead on their knees, and if that's easy, you might think about tucking your chin a little and trying to bring more the hairline to the legs. It's sort of amazing, the biodiversity in our species, how bone structures and bodies will have different ranges of motion. Try not to value one subset over another. There is value genetically, culturally, even on the levels of what is obvious in nature, to how you are. All right, and very slowly over the next couple of breaths, start to notice there's a lot of pressure in your knees. You can come forward with this and bring your head to the ground. Please be mindful. You'll have to use your hands a little bit in that context to support you if your head is touching the earth. You can also choose a support underneath your hips. Right? If you're not experiencing that, you might stay right where you are. That's usually about the moment when I notice it, my own knees. We're about halfway through our time here. And very slowly begin to release your hold in this posture. You might come up and forward. Again, you can stretch your legs out. Give yourself a lot of space to extend through your knees to let all the blood flow back into your lower body. We're going to work in Virasana or Vajrasana, which means thunderbolt or epiphany of illumination, which is kind of cool. Asana. Some people say this version looks like a thunderbolt. There's a couple of other versions of thunderbolt pose out there in the world. So this version is about a fold in the knees. So I like to take a towel and sit up on it if my knees are feeling tender or tight. You could also stack up books or a block. It could be quite high. And even do this sitting in a chair. For some bodies, that's how it is, especially if you're strong, athletes, weightlifters. Some folks are just really strong in the front seam of their body for other reasons. Feel free to sit up on something tall. Try not to overdo it with your knees or make it too pressureful. On the other hand, some bodies will be able to sit their hips on the ground. If you have a knee issue in one knee, you might do this with one leg folded and the other one out long and switch at the halfway point. You can stay upright here. A lot of us will. Can lean back against a wall if you'd like to, or hang your head forward and down, or do neck stretches if you wish. Some of you will come down onto the back seam of your body. And in that way, you might go slow. If you have props around to support you, you can always set them up like a ramp behind you so that you have a lot of support coming down. You can also lean against a couch, etc., behind you so you have more height. If you're coming down onto your back, you may need support to land. You may find that stacking 2 blocks in a row, putting a towel over it, and stacking a pillow, the base of your spine gives you that support to come over and down. As you make your way into the version of the posture that makes the most sense for you, we will stay in this pose for about 5 minutes, which is like, sometimes a little longer than being in this pose feels good for some people. If you're coming down to a point like this, you might back bend, hang your head back. If it starts to feel like too much, you may sort of note that for the next practice. Though the body's different every day, you might sort of consider, well, how deep is really the right place for me? It can be surprising if you have a huge range of motion when you're active that sometimes you actually need to limit range of motion to really be soft in these postures. But not always, just a consideration. If you're all the way on your back, you could take your arms overhead as long as you don't feel tingling or burning in the fingers or the neck. You might take the arms down by the sides. You might rest your hands on your belly or on your heart. Breathe. Notice. The quad, I think, is a strong muscle for a lot of people, and the psoas and the abdominals all stretching here. They're usually stretching just softly, just a sense of slight tug, like the sweater of your body's fibers is being folded. Especially over time, you may notice that the hamstring or the calf or the glute, those back muscles of the body want to turn on to help alleviate this sort of stretching, soft pressure to go to a more collaborative place. And continue to ask for softness where you can in all of the muscle groups. For some people, these muscles take 3 minutes to soften, some people 8, some people even up to 20, 25 minutes to really fully disengage and allow the body to be where it is without action. Allow for time, allow for kindness. Practicing moving through time with perspective often means being wise about those narratives, about the way that we think about ourselves in time. Are we attached to who we believe will be in the future? Are we attached to how things had been in the past, how we had been in the past, etc., so on? Wisdom sometimes means taking a step outside of time instead of being pushed and pulled by an idea of time, letting time be an equal collaborator in our experience of things. Yes, and you're more than halfway through your hold in this posture. We're nearing the final minute, in fact. Good, and very slowly, whether you're upright or down on your back, begin to exit your posture. You might drag yourself up if you're down. You might start to come forward to a hands and knees position, stretching out your legs one at a time. Sometimes it can be nice to curl under the toes and give a little roll of the ankle. All right, from here, we're going to move into a little bit of stretch for the back of the heart before we come into postures that are backward bends. And so find a hands and knees position slowly. Take your time. You can always get there before or after I do. You can press down into your right hand, I'll twist to the right first. Take a moment and see if you can kind of bring your body weight forward over your hands. You don't really need to have a really long distance between hands and knees. Sometimes closer to the knees is better for this type of thing. You can take your left arm up so you have ways to experiment and come down and underneath your right arm, come down to your shoulder, your jaw. Some of you will create a pillow landing, as it were, for your head. Some of us kind of roll the body down. This puts a lot of pressure on the deltoid of the left arm and shoulder. If you feel like your feet are light, you can put a weight on them. You have a sandbag around or a sleeping cat or something like that. Feel free to put something soft and heavy on your feet, or curl the toes to feel grounded. You might find that you do want to be more forward. It puts more twist in your spine or feels more effective or grounded. And today I'll offer that if it feels stable, You can take your left hand and hang it. Sometimes it can be nice to sort of tent to your right fingertips and kind of hang your arm and make some circles. And also put your hand up on a knee or a block to do this. Lean to the right. You can fold and stretch your wrist out if you wish. When you're ready, press down through your left hand and take your right arm up and thread the needle underneath and behind. Come down to your right shoulder, ear, or jaw and breathe here. Things might be the same from side to side. They're often different. You might choose a different variation. You might choose the same one. Maybe you do the left side twice or the right side twice on purpose. Know that those things are present for you. Right? There's a lot of space to choose your own ending in each posture, to see your own meaning. I think you find a lot of artists resonating with yoga. I know I came via that pathway to yoga because there's this context of, instead of looking at the rationale and the academia and the logistics, which are all valuable ways of looking at things, it asks us to sort of understand things from a different point of view, maybe a non-rational point of view. And a lot of creativity has to be generated from that perspective in the first place. So when we come to yoga, we find that it fills a little gap in our experience of the world and ourselves, because it allows us to not label, to be with process, to rehearse, to practice being with who we are, practice being with ideas that can't be reconciled by rationale or by knowledge or by academia, that come from wisdom and kindness and experience. Just about one more minute in this posture on this side. Very kindly, compassionately begin to release your hold in this pose. You can return your left hand to the mat and release your right arm. Again, you might tent to the left fingertips and swing your arm around a little, or stretch it back out and up. Sometimes movement is the language that you tend your body with. Sometimes stillness is required, right? Just like in a beautiful piece of music, sometimes it's the silence that illuminates the sound for us. And as you slowly come up and out of this pose, make your way to a seat. So we're going to do just one seated forward fold today. Again, the towel might be your friend. I like to fold it up for myself to about this setting. You might roll it up to any setting you like, including none at all, and sit up on the edge of it. And bring your feet together and your soles wide for the Baddha Konasana, or the long-winged butterfly. You can have your feet together or your toes wide. It's more like 90 degrees in each knee than it is like a close fold. A lot of us are used to doing this version, which emphasizes more pressure on the inner thighs. And if you like it, you can do it. It tends to be a lot of pressure in the knees. This wider version puts more pressure in the outside edge of the hips, but if it's too much in your outer knees or IT bands, you can use lifts underneath the knees or whatever setting makes the most sense for you. You can use them, add them, remove them throughout. If your blocks are really hard, you could also wrap them up in towels. I know I'm bony, and sometimes the floor even needs to be padded with my hands or an extra towel, so give yourself that space to do so. and then folding forward and down. You can hang your head. Again, you might use props set up to catch you. This is why having 3 or 4 towels might be nice. You might choose to have your legs wider, even longer for some people. If you know this is not for you today, you might take the seated forward fold with 2 legs out long in front. And you can make this spinal extension, kind of letting yourself get long as you come down. You can also round your body by making more lift, as we did, sitting on the heels a few postures back. We'll be in this posture for 10 minutes. And we held our first few poses for about that long. And shortening the postures a little bit as we go, as we sort of settle into being able to relax over time. But know that, of course, that timeline is not meant to create tension. A lot of our work here, whether it's spoken about this way or not, is in trauma processing in the body. Whether you think of it as trauma or think of it as stress, etc., or tension, our body reacts and learns to sort of build itself based on those big deal moments that we have, or the continuous response or reaction that we have to them. And that's just human. And sometimes trauma has actually kept us in a constant state of yang, a constant state of reacting, of fight or flight, because it helped us survive, or we perceived that we needed it to survive. Yoga, instead of being a survival practice, though sometimes it can feel that way, asks us to be more inside of a place or a threshold where we thrive, where we feel abundant, not at the extreme. You're about halfway through your time in this posture. You can always adjust if you need to. Otherwise, check in. Come back to paying attention to how things are in the here and now, in your here and now. And these are the last 2 minutes in this posture. Consider resiliency. And you can practice accountability, responsibility, kindness, just on the level of yourself. Notice your ability to forgive yourself, your ability to hold yourself accountable, and just like forgiveness between you and someone else, growth, change, repair, etc. There has to be accountability. There has to be a sense of knowledge and excavation around where friction is met and why. Consider that all kindness work, all liberation work comes with a sense of sustainability, time, responsibility, accountability. And for this last minute in this hold, consider that the point of view might be that you are so powerful that you will be able to take the time. So powerful that you will be able to make mistakes and learn from them. And you will be able to have triumphs and live inside of them, etc., and so on. Often it's when we don't think that we're powerful enough that we find a sense of getting stuck in time, old narratives or pathways. Very slowly begin to release your time in this posture. You can come out and take your legs out long and drop them from side to side, and take a stretch here or there. Maybe there's a leaning back to lift the heart up as if showing the face to the sun, or a windshield wipering of the knees to release any tension through your hips. And as you're ready, we're going to make our way into our last posture, which you could use as your resting pose as well, or I'll let you know when to come up and out of it. I'm going to do the supported fish pose, which often is not really considered particularly yin at all because it's very yang, very opening of the front seam. We're going to do it with support. So if you have blocks, it may be a bit difficult to see. What I often suggest is that you take one block over here at this sort of mid setting, right? Not the lowest setting, but the mid setting on the ground. And then you would take another block and put it at the tallest setting, sort of so it looks like a T from above looking down. Now there's another T you can make where you set the tall block on the mid setting and the lower block on the lowest setting. And then you might think about the setting here is this taller block is going to go underneath your head and the shorter block is going to go behind your heart. So some people put the block lengthwise behind the heart, and some people will put it widthwise behind the heart. So you can experiment with it. If you're like, I don't have blocks, WTF am I supposed to do about this pose? You can roll up your yoga mat, honestly, and take it lengthwise from your tail up to your back. And I'm going to show you how that might work with a towel. So if I've rolled this towel up to a width like this, like sort of yoga mat height, put it at the base of my tail and lean back over it. The other way that you can do this is to take that yoga mat and put it widthwise behind your heart so that you're coming over a higher lift. The arms can go up or out to the sides. Your legs can go out long. As you set yourself up for whatever version you're coming into, know that we'll stay for about, and then I'll give you an option for another 4 or 5 minutes to rest in a different position. It can be helpful for your head. So if you feel like your chin is hanging back and you can't breathe, get a higher height for your head. Some of us will feel a little like we're being poked, especially for the first few minutes. Sometimes there's that sense of like a really good, just somebody kind of pressing on you with. I'll keep time for you. And I'll let you know when to come to rest. If you know this pose isn't for you right off the bat, feel free to come into a different shape for rest, like legs up the wall, or Shavasana with legs long, or lay on your side or your belly. Some of you might prefer to do the supported bridge pose instead, the back bend stretching the front of the hips. Settle down and in, and perhaps close the eyes. And perhaps you decide that this is the position you want to remain in for resting. Perhaps at this point, you need to discern a different resting position, and it can really be anything. You can come to a seat, you can lie on your back, you can roll over to a cozy couch or chair and lie down on them. Whatever feels like a sustainable place for you to restore and integrate the information and experience of your practice is golden. Remember again that it should be sustainable. You'll be there over time. And as you resettle or resolve to be where you are, you recreate a space of rest, know that I'll call you up and out when it's time for us to end. So if you need to turn off the video or mute it so that you don't have to work on that timeline or fast forward it, etc., it's all up to you. And just consider that as a part of the tool, right? That I'll hold time for you for another 4 minutes or so. Close the eyes or pick a spot to see. Let gravity pull in your bones. Let there be some softness inside you. Notice how things really are. Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavitvashavai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. If you're lying in rest and wish to remain doing so, do, as long as you wish. The time has come for you to return to action. Begin to slowly go to your breath and ask it to become purposeful again. Breathe a little deeper, longer, slower. Create some rise and fall in the body softly. And as you see fit, you can ride intentional breath into kind movement. Wiggle your fingers and toes, run your tongue over your mouth surfaces, scrunch and spread your face. Roll your ankles and wrists around. When you're ready, you might begin stretching out or up. Pick a side to roll onto. Gather your knees into your chest and roll onto that side. Pause in the side body in the fetal position, knees into the heart and head resting on a hand or a prop, an arm or the earth. Take a moment to acknowledge process. I think this is a good time to acknowledge with great gratitude your own willingness to show up and practice, to acknowledge the privilege that you have to come to the practice in whatever way that you do, to acknowledge the lineage of the practice from India, from China, from the Southeast, and the history of imperialism, colonialism, of objectification, history of oppression, of which these practices have been filtered through to come to us. So consider the work that you're doing to disentangle your work from that history, to acknowledge that history, how to heal the harm done, and how you can move forward in time and space, and how you can let those narratives change as they need to. I think it's important to consider the land that you're on, the ancestry. I'm here on Samish, Lumi, Straight Salish land in the San Juan Islands. If you're in Seattle, you may be on Duwamish land. You might just consider that as you consider your own ancestors and their history and experience that has led you to where you are in this timeline. Consider teachers of all kinds, knowledge of all lineage that has come to you. Consider the obstacles and difficulties that you've had to overcome, the oppressions you may have to have overcome to come to this practice. Gratitude practice is one of liberation. When you're ready, use your top hand to press yourself up towards a seat and we'll seal in together. That's a traditional chant, another Vedic chant. I learned it in the lineage of Krishnamacharya from the south of India and Gokulam and Mysore, from which practices like Ashtanga Yoga and Vinyasa Yoga come. Its overarching meaning is about our work together in a community of learning. Means may we together be protected. May we together know joy. May our work together for the betterment of all things be brilliant. May we not hate, fight, or dispute with one another. And may our work seek to lead us towards universal cosmic union and peace. If you wish, you can fold your hands in the Anjali Mudra, a symbol of that meeting place between context of duality, yin and yang, sun and moon, beginning and end. They all find a place where they become one on the spectrum of everything. Thank you for your time, your energy, your effort. If you wish, you can bring your thumbs to the space of the third eye, space of wisdom in the forehead, and bow to yourself, seal in your practice. Thank you so much for being a part of this, for utilizing this video, for letting me be a part of your practice. Please continue to use it as a tool. I want to put forth that it's really important to me that both my teaching practice and my yoga practice be one that is anti-racist and is anti-colonial, and I'm still learning, right, and obviously have a lot more learning to do. So I appreciate you can send direct donations this week, either to the Minnesota Healing Justice Network. I'll put links for both of these in the video, and also to the Black Trans Task Force in Washington. I'm going to start donations on the 4th forward, 50% of all proceeds to that group. And I'm considering just what it means to continue to put commodity where my mouth is, to continue to do this practice to the best of my ability in kindness and in truth. And I appreciate you. Thank you so much. If you need anything, reach out to me. Otherwise, keep practicing in all the ways that you can. If you're protesting, protest. If you're learning, learning. If you're thriving, thrive. I stand in solidarity with you. Love to you all. See you soon.